let me begin by asking you a very simple, basic question, Mr. J. Sai Deepak, and thank you for sharing this time. In Dharmasthala, a temple with centuries of Hindu tradition was suddenly painted as being involved in some odious activities. Some even suggested it was anti-Dalit. Isn't this a classic case of falsehood being weaponized to malign Hindu institutions, in your opinion?
The generation of atrocity literature in relation to Hindu institutions is not a post-independent India phenomenon. This has been going on at least for the last 200 to 250 years. And I think several authors have written tomes on this. I have commented on this ad nauseum. I've spoken about this extensively. It just so happens that while we happen to be a Hindu majority country, that is, of course, until the census says otherwise, the fact of the matter is we are not exactly a conscious Hindu majority when it comes to our rights, and particularly when it comes to the weaponization of our history and using it to secularize our institutions, our faith systems, and the gradual balconization of Hindu dharma on linguistic, ethnic, chauvinist lines and regional lines, I think is something that we need to become extremely aware of. The South has been the crucible for this experiment for a good 2 centuries at the very least, starting from German missionaries or even Dutch missionaries. And on this, I've written a series of articles in the Indian Express. The fact of the matter is, the unfortunate reality is that current day collaborators exist from within the Hindu community under the name of reform, in the name of progressive values, in the name of liberalism, in the name of secularism. And they are what I've always called Hindus in name only, whose sole intention and goal is to somehow undermine the foundations of Bharat, which is Hindu Dharma. Allow me to say this, I have no problems whatsoever when somebody chooses to call out certain practices which they may not agree with on the ground that it may not even meet with the standards of even Hindu behavior. Right. I understand that. Okay, so I'm not going to paint everybody with the same brush. But by and large, my reading of history says I will start with a certain degree of circumspection, dare I say even suspicion, until proven otherwise. Given that the people who front these activities are not the dramatists personally themselves, they typically happen to be the puppets with puppeteers coming from the known culprits, and I usually end up tracing the origins to evangelical sources one way or another.
Okay? Interesting.
What's happening in Kerala, what's happening in Tamil Nadu, what's happening in coastal Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka, they are not part of isolated instances. These are not supposed to be seen in walled gardens. Look at the entire picture, and you will know that the sudden emergence of a TVK in Tamil Nadu, which I've always called a plan B of a particular, let's say, faith system, or maybe perhaps an evangelical system, and the simultaneous spilling over of Dravidian sentiments into Telangana, simultaneous spilling over of Dravidian sentiments into Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. This is not a matter of happenstance. There is some let's say, there is some thought at play. Now, we'll have to find out who is exactly calling the shots. It just so happens the moment you start tracing the origins and you start following the money trail and the activist trail, you will be told that this is a communal exercise and it's a fishing and roving activity which is meant to target certain minorities.
Okay, so this is an interesting point, because at least I can tell you, in a limited, with respect to one particular incident, the Congress invited Banu Mushtaq. I'm not saying that the Congress is behind all of this in a blanket way, but I'm just saying the Congress government there invites Banu Mushtaq in Karnataka, Muslim author, to inaugurate Dasara. But would they ever invite a Hindu pujari to inaugurate Eid, or maybe even a Hindu author, or even an atheist? Why are Hindus always asked to prove their secularism? Because when people raise objections, they say, oh, you're being communally minded. What is the big deal? This is a massively beautiful occasion. Dasara, don't look at it from a religious lens. This is a larger moral victory over, evil, this, that, the other. You know the trope.
Let me actually turn your question on its head and answer it in a different way. Please allow me to do it.
Yeah, please.
I don't care whether a Hindu or an atheist is invited to their events. As a Hindu, I don't wish to be invited to any of their events. I don't have a problem whatsoever. Okay? I stand only on one principle. My faith system has certain expectations and requirements, and do not secularize my festivals and my religious occasions. And we want only those who believe in our faith system and who respect it at the very least to be invited. Nobody else is invited, period. That's it. Okay. Now, I don't care whether people from my faith are called to somebody else's occasions, religious occasions. That argument really doesn't hold water for me. Second, secularization is something that even the most prominent of non-left voices in this country celebrate. They even stand by secularism for some reason. I've said this as much. The insertion of secularism in the constitution in emergent circumstances or under an emergency and its use before and after have typically worked to the detriment of Bharat's civilizational identity. Panth Nirpekshita has been our position. That means we have a specific civilizational and faith identity, but we will choose to be equidistant from various panths. That does not mean that we do not have a civilizational identity which is religious in nature. And this aspect, unfortunately, even members of the so-called non-left are not willing to buy, and they're not willing to take the particular position because most of them have bought into this hogwash to the extent that they don't have the courage of its conviction to call out the fundamental problem with secularism. Okay. And therefore, they will use words like pseudo-secular, hypocrisy, so on and so forth, as opposed to asking, is secularism consistent with Bharatiya civilizational ethos, especially after partition on religious lines? That's the question you need to ask and answer, period. The person who's been invited to inaugurate the Mysuru Dasara festival, I'm sorry to say, I have a problem on two counts. She doesn't come from the Hindu community. It's one thing to say I have a problem with someone coming from another community. I'm making the statement a non-Hindu cannot participate, period, and cannot inaugurate. It is a religious festival. Two, over the last 5 to 6 years, Karnataka has seen a hyper-regional chauvinistic identity being pushed deliberately to separate it from the Bharatiya mainstream. And I always believe that Congress or any other party that shares its faith system is only a front-end actor. They are not the ones who are actually calling the shots. This is not conspiracy theory, at least not in 2025. There are enough and more reasons to believe that somebody else is running this entire campaign. And there could be, let's say, a confluence of real estate forces, religious forces, so on and so forth. But the fact that there is a religious hand in it is typically not to be negated. It will emerge. Which is why when the controversy broke out with respect to Dharmasthala, I decided to keep my mouth shut until the facts emerged. And now the facts speak for themselves.
Okay, let me just press you on this, because when Diwali is called just a festival of lights or Ram Navami a spring festival, isn't this erasing the gods, rituals and civilizational memory that define them?
The very same geniuses who indulge in erasure of Hindu civilizational identity as far as Hindus and Bharat are concerned would happily stand up for indigenous communities in America and other parts of the world for their rights, because they will immediately say this is erasure of indigenous identity. But when it comes to Bharat, they genuinely believe, or at least they put on this facade, that Sanatana Dharma is the colonizing identity of Bharat, and apparently there was a pre-Sanatana Dharma indigenous identity of Bharat which they seek to protect. But the fact of the matter is, all of them seem to be paving way either for the jihadi or the evangelical, but not for any other indigenous identity. Everyone who chooses to bat for the indigenous identity at the end of the day, in the name of regional indigenism, ultimately forces them to become weak, because in isolation they may not have the ability to meet the challenge thrown at them by organized faith systems. So Sanatana Dharma, if it chooses to cannibalize itself or balconize itself, will not be in a position to meet this challenge region by region, language by language, for the simple reason that it does not have the same kind of bargaining chips at the negotiating table, and there is no negotiation here.
So what you're saying is that the left deliberately dilutes Hindu festivals because it fears their cultural strength and continuity, and perhaps their ability to organize and at some level infuse Hindu consciousness. Is that what you're saying?
So the strategy is first attack the super layer of Sanskritization and therefore attack Sanskrit and all other identities associated with it, and specifically the Brahmin identity. So remove the Brahmin layer by starting anti-Brahmin movements or let's say specifically anti-Brahmin movements in the name of social justice and oppression and reform. That's the first layer. Then along with Sanskrit, you'll have to remove Hindi, and you'll infuse the Aryan-Dravidian divide even further. Once Hindi is removed, then you will say each of these languages has been a classical language with no Sanskritic influence whatsoever. And if at all there is a Sanskrit influence, it must be attributed to the Brahmin virus. That will be the argument that will be presented. So gradually, what you're looking at is balkanization of the larger Bharatiya civilizational identity, strand by strand, layer by layer, leaving each of these identities vulnerable to predatory proselytization or conversion, as the case may be.
So, to simply put it for our viewers, if future generations, I'm just speaking about one example of a festival, if future generations are taught Dasara is merely a harvest festival or what have you, this will open the doors for the theft of Hindu history itself, viewers, weakening the faith and making it powerless in the hands of other proselytizing faiths, reducing its ability to fight back and so on and so forth. Now, you are attributing, and this is very interesting, you are looking at this from not just a appeasement / political party lens, but you're sort of widen the lens to say that this is a much deeper conspiracy.
The political lens is the most superficial, myopic lens that one can adopt when one is looking at these issues. Because it's easy to turn this into a BJP versus Congress fight, okay, center versus state fight, state police versus NIA versus CBS fight, okay. I'm sorry to say, I've long learned that that's always only the most superficial layer. The more you scratch, you'll realize that there are certain forces at play in different parts of the country whose job 24/7/365 is to basically remove Hindu consciousness, specifically Vedic Sanatani consciousness, to its last strand and leave no smidgen of it whatsoever, making it extremely difficult for perhaps the last standing polytheistic idolatrous civilization to put up a resistance to, let's call it, expansionist forces, which are monotheistic in nature or monochromatic in nature. When you do that, Kannadigas on their own cannot put up a fight. Telugus on their own cannot put up a fight. Tamils on their own cannot put up a fight. Bengalis on their own cannot put up a fight. So today, the first thing is divide and then conquer. And the worst part is there are more, they'll find enough and more collaborators from within the community who will buy into this hogwash where they say there is no such thing called as Bharatiya Sanskriti or there is no Sanskritic layer whatsoever. Anyone who pushes for a Sanskritic layer is a Brahmin stooge or a Brahmin supremacist or a Manuvadi, so on and so forth. And this language today is not limited only to the left. Members of the left, some prominent members of the left, non-left, are also speaking the same language without realizing that they are hurting the cause of Hindu civilizational identity more than anything else. If you really wish to address the larger issue of unity, start from civilization, not from politics. The issue is societal, not political.
So apart from, look at Europe. Christmas is never stripped of Christ. Yet in India, Diwali is reduced to candles and sweets. And in some places now, of course, there's even a ban, as you know, on celebrating with crackers.
Right.
I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying. Now, some people who say this is a colonial template applied selectively against Hindus, don't look at it from, these people, poor things, they have labored under the British for far too long, and old school dictated the terms of our history and the way we interpret our philosophy, etc. So don't blame them. This is nothing to do with proselytization, etc. How do you respond to those people?
I'm sorry to say this. There is only so much that you can constantly blame the British man or the British woman for 200 years ago. Because of the last 70 years, the collaborators and the people actually implementing it on the ground have been Indians. Okay. The problem, of course, is some of them truly believe that this is the way forward in terms of social reform, that you kill the Sanatani identity fully. That's the only way to achieve social justice. And some are motivated parties who retain their Hindu names, but whose template within, which is the hardware on the face of it is Hindu, but the software within the head has been completely changed because either they've been bought or they've found incentives, or they choose to use their paper Hindu identity as a weapon against other Hindus to convince them about the futility of remaining Hindus. This template has been going on for quite some time. That's why I keep saying every time these issues come up, the first thing that meets your eye is a political problem. But I would say wait for the civilizational problem to emerge, and then the true hand emerges. The invisible hand will emerge, where you will realize that there is somebody else calling the shots. Because on the face of it, let's look at it this way. no political party will take such a decision unless somebody on the ground has created circumstances which are conducive for this particular sentiment. Because political parties don't have the time to do this. Somebody else is doing it on the ground. So a non-state actor chooses to create fertile ground.
Who are these people? Sai Deepak, who are these people?
If 25% of Andhra Pradesh today, I think, admittedly has become Christian, and there are vast portions of coastal Tamil Nadu which have become Christian, the fact of the matter is there are aggressive evangelical organizations at work, and this has been going on for quite some time. Now, I don't know which particular organization. I am not going to blame the entire community. I'm not going to blame the entire group. But there are hyper-evangelical forces at work which have been in existence in India, at least for the last 200 years, where different denominations have divided the territories of Bharat for their own work. I've explained this in detail in the first book. Many others have done this much better than me, even before and after me. So my limited suggestion perhaps to your viewership and your audience is, you can start blaming Siddaramaiah, or you can start blaming the lady in question. They are, at the end of the day, only puppets. Find out who is calling the shots, and why are they so keen on acting on the instructions of their puppeteer.
Okay, so let me frame this now loosely. My next question, apart from taking the Hindu out of the Indian, which was a chapter that I held forth on in my own book, there is now an attempt to replace Hindu population itself. And just today as we speak in Delhi, there's a massive meeting going on between certain actors, as you know, from a particular ecosystem, and one of their leading lights has come out and said, listen, open our borders, what's the big deal? Let Bangladeshis come in, let others come in from our neighborhood, because after all, they're all humans and they're required to be tended to. We must become one big open dharamshala of sorts.
Correct.
So this is another attempt, isn't it? So it's not just about taking the Hindu out of the Indian, is just to replace the Hindu completely. Would you agree with this, or do you think we're going too far and we are being intolerant?
No, the opposition to the CAA and the simultaneous opposition to the NRC, the opposition to the taking of the census, and the opposition for deportation of illegal migrants, the opposition to deportation of Rohingyas, in my view, must be seen in the same light. The fundamental principle at work is anti-Sanatana philosophy. And the second layer there is use humanitarianism and secularism to push this so-called agenda, which leads to open borders. After a point, we will be told that Bharat does not have a particularly single majority identity, because if you look at the population across the country, the population or the demographics would have been changed gradually, district by district. If you go to a certain border districts of Bihar today, you know for a fact that the demography balance has been completely inverted. So this is an activity that will go on for another 25-30 years, after which you don't need to worry about any kind of hostile takeover, because the system will be populated by these people. One of the principal arguments that was taken with respect to the introduction of the Aadhaar card, when the BJP was in opposition, and when the Joint Parliamentary Committee was chaired by a person from the BJP, was that Aadhaar could lead to greater regularization, normalization of illegal migrants.
True.
Now, today, tell me in 2025, over the last 15-16 years, this has not come true, or at least over the last decade or so, this has not come true. It has come true.
Yeah.
Because every such person is in possession of Aadhaar. Now, what we were told is, Aadhaar does not give you the right to vote because it is not one of the ID cards for issuance of a voter ID card. Aadhaar could lead to creation of documents. Those documents could be used for electoral purposes. In any case, if Aadhaar is sufficient for access to states' resources, that is the starting point. And after that, it's really not difficult to start forging documents. If there is documented proof that over the last 15 years in Assam, there have been groups at work to create forged documents for illegal migrants, Aadhaar, in my humble submission, has only played into it, notwithstanding the benefits that you may have got from Aadhaar. Okay? I think we need to seriously reconsider some of our positions on these issues. I do agree that some of these, let's say, identities have given us points of single convergence in terms of data. Maybe so. But have they been foolproof enough to detect illegal migrants from getting access to Aadhaar? Because in my view, economic transaction, economic convenience takes a back seat. The country's territorial integrity and civilizational integrity and demographic integrity is the first priority. Anything else that comes at the expense of each of these three layers has to take a back seat.